Today, I'm going to be picking each Premier League club's player of the season. I put out a tweet earlier in the week, you might well have seen it, asking for your club's player of the season. I wanted to go through the suggestions and narrow it down to 3 options per club. That is what I've done in this beautifully laid out table. Spent a lot of time on this, probably too much. We're going to run through the top 3 suggestions per club then. We'll analyse them and I'll pick who I think should be that club's player of the season. We'll start alphabetically then with Arsenal. The top 3 suggestions: Rice, interestingly Ben White, and Gabriel. Now I was thinking potentially Saka, Martin Odegaard in here, but lots of Arsenal fans wanted me to talk about Ben White and Gabriel. Declan Rice though, for me, is the pick amongst these 3 guys. I think the fact he's arrived for £105 million and not a single soul on this planet is talking about that price tag tells me he has been out of this world. 8 progressive passes this season, up from 6 last season. Defensive output off the scale, but also chipping in with goals. 11 goal involvements in the league is not to be sniffed at. Some big moments in there for him too. If we're talking about Ben White, I think his on-the-ball ability has gone up another notch. To be honest, this season, I think progressive passes, pass completion, he's in the top 10% of European fullbacks. His overlapping runs add a totally different dynamic to Arsenal's wide game. But I think second for me, and pushing Rice really close, it is tough. Gabriel has had an amazing season. I think he's been the second best centre-back in the league for me, behind Virgil van Dijk. I think he has had a better season than William Saliba. And it's bizarre to think, isn't it, that he didn't start any of the first 4 games of the season. Mikel Arteta was moving towards a system that didn't necessarily include Gabriel. Timber was being used as a left back. We saw Thomas Partey playing as a right back, inverting into that midfield role. That quickly went out the door. Gabriel came back in. I think he started every game since then in the league. He has been a monster. Aerial duel master, great in both boxes, fantastic ground coverer. But for me, I still think Rice has been the most important player for Arsenal this season. 3 suggestions for Villa. We have Watkins, Martinez and John McGinn. There are actually a lot of suggestions, but I've narrowed it down to these 3. Look, Emi Martinez has had maybe his best season in a Villa shirt. Best post-shot expected goals numbers of any goalkeeper in the league. Still probably Europe's best, or if not one of the best claimers of high crosses and kind of penalty box dominant goalkeepers. I love the way he plays. Maybe he's not the best with the ball at his feet, and I'm sure that's something he's working on to Unai Emery. But as out-and-out goalkeeper, as a leader of a backline, Martinez is awesome. Ollie Watkins, though, is going to be my pick. I don't think you can laugh at 19 goals and 10 assists. He is legitimate. You know, we talk about Palmer being on for most goals, most assists. Watkins is actually on for it even more. You know, Watkins, 1 goal behind Palmer, but the most assists of any player in the Premier League, which people don't talk about enough with Ollie Watkins. His ability to bring other players into the game. His assist numbers are outrageous. And most impressively for me, you know, Palmer, lots of penalty numbers. He's had an amazing season, Palmer. I'm not bagging on him. Watkins hasn't scored a penalty this season. He doesn't take Villa's penalties. So it's 19 goals, 10 assists without a single penalty. 3,000 plus minutes. He's got double figures of goals every single season going back to 2016 at Exeter City. And when I used to watch him at St James's Park at Exeter City, he was basically playing as a centre mid. Let's go to Bournemouth, where the 3 most talked about names were Solanke, Semenyo and Zabarnyi. Now, we've covered Zabarnyi a lot in recent weeks. 21-year-old centre-back, absolutely outstanding. One of the signings of the season for me. But a little bit like Semenyo, who has had an amazing season. You know, 9 goal involvements in 20 games, I think, for Bournemouth. He's not been at the level of Dom Solanke, who I think has had his most outstanding season of any in his professional career. And it's crazy to think he probably won't go to the Euros. You know, 17 goals, 3 assists this season. His non-penalty expected goals numbers have doubled from last season. I think Iraola has had a massive influence on his outstanding season. You look at his previous Premier League numbers, no goals in his first season, I think in 10 odd matches, then 3 goals, then 6 goals, and a massive leap forward this season because classically his championship numbers have been outstanding. And I think there was a conversation starting to develop, is he a tier 2 striker? Well, no, we're talking about a Premier League 17 goal scoring striker who can go out there and bully defences, as we saw against Man United at the weekend. Outstanding season. Brentford haven't had their best season, have they? I mean, we could talk about Brian Mbeumo, who's got 10 goal involvements in 17 starts. We could talk about Wissa, who I think has got similar numbers, maybe 9 goal involvements. But I think it has been Norgard. You know, he's captained the club at times. His defensive output remains one of the best in the league. You know, nearly 5 tackle and interceptions per game, but blocks, clearances, he wins all of his aerial duels. Defensively outstanding. His non-penalty XG has climbed this season because he's been arriving in the box. A leader on the pitch for Brentford in a difficult season. I'm siding with Christian Norgard on this one. At Brighton, we had 3 suggestions. Joao Pedro, who's obviously scored a lot of goals, been very influential in that Europa League campaign. A lot of them penalties, though. And then 2 standouts for me in Jan-Paul Van Hecke and Pascal Gross. Now, I think if we were talking about Van Hecke, we would be saying most improved. Definitely the most improved. One of the standout players for Brighton this season. You know, a couple of seasons ago, we saw him winning. I think he might have actually been the first loanee ever to win Blackburn's Player of the Year. Blackburn fans might be able to correct me on that. But an outstanding season defensively there. Last season, maybe a bit of a bedding-in period. This season has taken the reins as probably Brighton's best centre-back. I think he has had a better season than Lewis Dunk. Because look, he started 25 Premier League games this season. I think it's the second most of any player at the club. And his on-the-ball ability has shone. It has really improved under Roberto De Zerbi. And these are numbers we'd see from Lewis Dunk. You know, we know how influential he is to that style of play. I think Van Hecke has improved, not only on the ball, his defensive numbers continue to climb. This again looks like a massive bargain for Brighton, doesn't it? At £2 million. But for me, my player of the season for Brighton, their most influential player according to Roberto De Zerbi, again, even at 32 years old, it's Pascal Gross. I don't think this guy's ability is talked about nearly enough. He's definitely one of the best players outside the Big Six. He is so well-rounded. Look at this stats bomb radar. It is beautiful. This is a player whose game is just obviously super well-rounded, but is really contributing in forward areas this season. I think he's got 10 Premier League assists, which is the joint most in the league. He's got the 3rd most key passes this season. I think that's behind Martin Ødegaard and Bruno Fernandes. He's put up the 3rd most shot-creating actions. I think he's got the most starts at Brighton. I think since the start of last season, he might have scored the 3rd most goals in the Premier League of any midfielder. He never puts a foot wrong. He's Mr. Consistent. He starts every game. Player of the season. Let's go to Burnley. 3 suggestions here. This is tough, isn't it? Odobert, we've spoken about a lot recently. Dara O'Shea was being suggested to me. I'm going to settle on Sander Berge. I think 29 starts this season. He's probably been their most consistent player. Okay, let's go to Chelsea, where 3 suggestions came in for Palmer, Gusto, and Conor Gallagher. Conor Gallagher, I think, has had a good season, as much as he's lambasted by Chelsea fans at times for his on-the-ball ability. Clearly, there are holes in his game, but his work rate and his improvement, I think, this season has to be talked about. Malo Gusto has done an amazing job deputising for Reece James. Don't think he's at Reece James's level yet, but he's so young. However, I mean, it's obviously Cole Palmer, isn't it? Like, clearly. You know a stat that blew me away? He's got the 5th most goal involvements of any player in Europe. 38 goal involvements in all competitions. He's got more goal involvements than Florian Wirtz. And obviously Florian Wirtz has had the season of his life. Leverkusen have won the league. But Palmer is doing it in a really ramshackle Chelsea team. Palace fans in my replies were struggling, I'll be honest with you, to name a player of the season. They didn't know. It was a split opinion. Jefferson Lerma got some shouts. Adam Wharton got some shouts, even though he only joined the club in January. I think that speaks volumes. And Michael Elise. And everybody knows how much I love Adam Wharton. I talked about him last week, going on to become a future England international for sure. I don't think he's going to be at Palace for very long. He is a special talent, but I don't think you can pick a player of the season who joined in January. Michael Elise, he's only played 13 games. I don't think it's enough. So I'm going to come down the side of Jefferson Lerma, who started 27 games this season. He's played 2,500 minutes of football. I think it's the 4th most minutes of any player in the squad. He's been super versatile, extremely consistent, and his ability to play in multiple different roles and positions isn't talked about. You know, we saw him operate as a left-sided centre-back at Anfield at the weekend and keep a clean sheet. In a back 3 that consisted of him, Joachim Andersen, who had a great game, and Nathaniel Klein. Like, Lerma has done it all. He's been very consistent, hasn't really put a foot wrong since arriving from Bournemouth on that free transfer. Excellent player. At Everton, we had Branthwaite, we've got Mikalenko, who's had like a surprisingly good season in there, and I think maybe he was being suggested by Everton fans because nobody really speaks about him. James Tarkowski in there too, and they do have the 5th best defensive record in the league by expected goals against. I know they got trounced by Chelsea on the weekend, but I think it probably has to go to Branthwaite. Still only 21 years old, going to get that big move in the summer, highly talked about, and there's reasons why, as I've gone into in recent videos. I think he's absolutely superb. Do you think he struggled a bit recently, notably against Chelsea and Newcastle, but that's what's going to happen with 21-year-olds. I think there are very few options at Everton. There's definitely no one in the forward department. Fulham had 3 different suggestions. They had Muniz, who's obviously had an amazing run of form recently. He's up to 8 goals this season, isn't he? And to be honest with you, looks a real talent. We had Anthony Robinson at fullback and João Palhinha, who again has been a beast, a top-class performer in the midfield for Fulham. Most tackles of any player in Europe, I think, or in Europe's top 5 leagues this season. I think he's putting up over 5 tackles per 90 again in the Premier League. But I actually think I'm going to come down the side of this man here, Anthony Robinson. Most starts of any player in this Fulham squad, most minutes of any outfield player in the squad, 6 assists. His defensive game has really improved. He's very hard to beat in the 1v1 because of his athleticism, and his decision-making, again, has improved this year under Marco Silva. And that has led to a really outstanding all-round fullback profile beginning to form. This is the most interceptions of any Premier League player this season, the 4th most tackles of any Premier League player this season. At Fulham, most key passes, most carries, most defensive actions. He's been excellent. And for me, I'm putting Anthony Robinson down as Fulham's player of the season. Let's go to Liverpool, where we've got Van Dijk, we've got Mo Salah, and we've got Mac Allister being mentioned in there as well. Mac Allister, I definitely think second half of the season has really come into his own. It is 26 starts this season, 9 goal involvements. I think, by the way, 4th most tackles of any player in the Premier League. And since he's moved a little bit further forward, I know he did a job as a 6, but I think since Endo has come into that role, we've really started to see the best of Mac Allister. Because at the start of the season, when he was playing that more defensive role, he was doing a great job. I think the most tackles and interceptions in this Liverpool squad by over 40. So he covers the ground really well, but he is a great progressive passer. He has the ability to score excellent goals from outside the area. He's an outstanding player, one of the bargains of the season. Mo Salah, again, 23 goals, 13 assists. We can't joke about that, can we? Those numbers are ridiculous. But I don't think his finishing has been classic Mo Salah recently. I think he's maybe slipped a little bit, which leads me to go on to Van Dijk, who I think this is a tap-in. I really think this is a tap-in for their best player. And yes, he might be 32 now, but I think he has been back to his absolute best this season. A progressive pass monster. His ability to switch the play completely changes the dynamic of how Liverpool want to play. I also don't think it's spoken enough about how much his partner has rotated on both sides. They've had problems at left back. Gomez has had to play there. Matip's been injured for the majority of the season. Konate's been injured. Quansah's had to play. Bradley's had to play. Trent's been injured. He's been the only consistent player in that back line, and that is really hard to do. He's 32 now, yes, back to his best, dominant in both boxes. His aerial duel percentage is one of the best in Premier League history. It continues to be. For me, he would be one of the 3 best players in the Premier League this season. Not just Liverpool's player of the season, he's a contender to win the Premier League player of the year again. At Luton, the 3 suggestions were Barkley, Adebayo and Alfie Doherty. I think Alfie Doherty has had a great season. Definitely Luton's most improved player, I think. 7 assists. Fantastic at any sort of dead ball. I think Adebayo's 9 goals in 13 starts need talking about. Obviously, Carlton Morris has got 9 goals as well. But it has been Ross Barkley. 4th most minutes of any player at Luton. I think there were question marks about how fit he was going to be when he arrived. He's totally dispelled that. He's one of the best ball-carrying central midfielders in the league. Great progressor from any sort of central zone. And he's also been able to put up 9 goal involvements, including a fantastic finish away at Manchester City at the weekend, despite the fact they ended up losing that game. I think it's Ross Barkley, right? Man City have 2 outstanding candidates, I think, in Rodri and Foden. Erling Haaland was kind of being spoken about. I think probably just because he scored 20 goals, but for me, no, I think it is between Rodri and Foden. And at 23 years old, to put up 11 goals, 6 assists, I think, in the Premier League, 22 goals, 10 assists in all competitions this season. He's just been a monster, Phil Foden, an absolute creative machine in the absence of Kevin De Bruyne. And his profile is just so well-rounded, whether it be as an attacking midfielder or a winger or occasionally dropping deeper. I mean, these numbers. Don't even look at him in the midfield realms. He has played predominantly as sort of a central 10, hasn't he? And I think that's taken his game to a whole new level. Because not only has he scored goals, he's scored big goals. You know, the 2 against United, he's got a goal against Spurs, 3 against Villa, 2 against Leipzig, the goal against Real Madrid. A very realistic contender to win the Premier League Player of the Year. But I still think it's Rodri. I still think Rodri has been Man City's Player of the Year. He's just been stupid. So ridiculous. I think it's 64 games unbeaten now, isn't it? When does that run go back to? It must be over a year now, surely. And I think the fact they've lost 5 out of 6 games without him this season kind of speaks volumes. He's talked about being a bit tired recently. He got his rest against Luton. They still managed to get the job done there. We know about Rodri's passing ability. You know, over 100 passes attempted at a 92% pass completion rate is frankly a joke. But he's got 7 goals and 7 assists this season. These are big numbers for a player that's supposedly a defensive midfielder, which he's no longer. He's an all-action, does-everything midfielder, one of the best we've ever seen in the Premier League. Because he's got the most passes at City, the most progressive passes, the most shot-creating actions, more shot-creating actions than Phil Foden, by the way, the most tackles and interceptions, the most defensive actions. He's 27. He's only 27. It's Rodri, guys. United, bare bones, isn't it? It's bare bones. 3 suggestions: Dalot, Mainu, Garnacho. I think Garnacho is at 32 starts in a row. Pretty big goal involvement numbers. Mainu kind of only come into his own the second half of the season because of that injury he suffered in pre-season against Real Madrid that was extremely unfortunate. You know, he's been excellent. But I think it has been Dalot. Dalot's been very consistent when he's played at right back. Not the biggest fan of his at left back. I think in the 1v1 defensively, he's quite easy to isolate as a left back because he doesn't like to tackle with the outside of his foot. He inverts really nicely now. I think he'd be a functional and high-performing right back for pretty much any team in Europe. Slightly unfortunate for him that Manchester United are in the state they're in right now. I think if he was playing for a better team, he would be one of the outstanding right backs in European football. Alright, at Newcastle, 3 suggestions: Isak, Schär and Anthony Gordon. Isak's got 17 Premier League goals. Really, really good. I think Fabian Schär, though, has had a better season than Alexander Isak. A little bit like Van Dijk. He's had a constantly rotating partnership, a constantly rotating fullback line. The amount of injuries Newcastle have suffered has been ridiculous. But Schär, very consistent. The most minutes of any player in the squad. I think the most passes. 3rd for most progressive passes in the squad. One of the best on-the-ball centre-backs in the league. And one of the most underrated players in the league. But for me, Newcastle's player of the season should be Anthony Gordon. 20 goal involvements in all competitions at 23 years old is really, really impressive. And it's 18 goal involvements in the Premier League as well. So these numbers haven't been skewed by League Cup, FA Cup, playing against fodder. In fact, his output against better teams seems to improve. You know, 2 goal involvements against Liverpool, a goal against United, a goal against Arsenal, 3 goal involvements against Tottenham, a goal and an assist against Chelsea. Super impressive numbers. But also, his off-the-ball work is amazing. He's a press leader at Newcastle. And I think my decision a couple of videos ago when I was talking about my England squad has probably changed in the last 2 weeks. I think Rashford would drop if I was redoing that now, and Gordon would go. As for Nottingham Forest, the 3 suggestions were Murillo, Chris Wood, who, by the way, is on 12 goals. You know, I think he's one of only about 10 players in Premier League history to score 10 plus goals in 5 seasons. Morgan Gibbs-White as well, one of my favourite players to watch. I love Morgan Gibbs-White. But I think it's been Murillo. You know, at 21 years old, to come into the Premier League as a left-foot centre-back isn't easy, especially when Nottingham Forest have had changeover in the managerial realm. You know, they haven't had the most settled squad, if we're honest. But Forest have, and I couldn't believe this when I read it, the 6th best record in the league for expected goals conceded. Which is mad when you think by actual goals conceded, I think they've conceded the 4th most. So goalkeeping department hasn't been great, but the defensive unit hasn't actually been a total shambles. Sheffield United's 3 suggestions were James McAtee, who's obviously on loan from Man City, really good technical player, Jayden Bogle, and Jack Robinson. Just for his heart and what he gives to Sheffield United's fan base, I don't think there's been as many players that have tried as hard. I think there are a few players at Sheffield United that have phoned it in this season. I don't think you can say that about Jack Robinson. I think he has bled for that shirt. Tottenham is one of the hardest clubs to do here. I actually think there's a few suggestions that have been missed out by Spurs fans. Vicario, Van de Ven, Son. I also think Destiny Doggy could have been in there, as could Pap Sarr. Let's talk about Son. Obviously, lots of goals this season again, but I don't think he's been as influential as Mickey Van de Ven, who has been outstanding. Without him, the high line totally fails, and I know it was exposed at Newcastle at the weekend, as was Van de Ven, who had a bad game, but prior to that game, he's been Mr. Consistent. His ability to cover ground and get back into defensive position is outstanding. He's formed a really nice partnership with Romero, who wants to step out the line. However, if we're looking at underlying numbers, and I've done that throughout, so I don't want to just bin that. If you look at Spurs' backline, yes, they might have the 6th best defensive record in the league, but by expected goals conceded, they're 12th. They concede a lot of high-quality shots, Tottenham. And I'm not saying that's Van de Ven's fault, but I think without Vicario, I don't think the season would have gone anywhere nearly as smooth as it has done. He has bailed them out on some big, big occasions. 3rd best in the league by post-shot expected goals. In his debut season in the league, he has been extremely sound. I think immediately people kind of associated him with being one of the best goalkeepers in the league. He's big, he's commanding. I think he could do better from corners. I think he needs to get off his line. But his shot stopping, outstanding. How he's fitted into this system, outstanding. I'm going Vicario. All right, West Ham suggestions were Jared Bowen, Emerson at fullback, and Areola. I think this one's clearly Jared Bowen, man. 19 goals, 8 assists in all competitions this season. And again, this needs an exclamation point. He hasn't scored a penalty. And not only is he good going forward, you have to do this in a David Moyes system, but you have to be super hard-working. As a defensive forward, he's outstanding. Top 10% of European forwards for tackles, for interceptions, for blocks, for pressures. He's an off-the-ball beast, but he's also started to become very, very cold and icy in front of goal, which is just what you want. Wolves, I also think it's quite a tough one to pick here. I think Nelson Semedo might well be the most improved player at Wolves under Gary O'Neill. Definitely a chance for that. Most distance covered, most carries, 3rd in the side for most defensive actions. I think Mario Lemina, probably the most consistent player in here. 4th most minutes in the squad, 29 starts. I think he's 2nd in the team for tackles and interceptions. Does everything really well. But for me, it's been Mateus Cunha. And he might only have, I think, one more goal than Hwang, but I think the goals he scored have been very different to Hwang. Hwang's goals have been quite scrappy. They've almost been quite poacher-esque, whereas Cunha has played a lot more minutes than Hwang. I think 25 Premier League starts. He's got 11 goals. He's also got 6 assists. He's one of the best in the league carrying the ball too. As I said, top 3 percentile for progressive carries and successful take-ons. He's a handful. He's physical. He's great in open space. Has scored some fantastic goals. And, he's got 11. Hwang's got 10. I think the next top scorer at Wolves has 4. So it's been vital those two score goals. I think if Hwang hadn't had the injury problems he's had, he'd be in this conversation too. But with 11 goals, 6 assists, some fantastic goals in there too, I'm picking Cunha. So that was me picking every club's player of the season. Let me know who your club's player of the season is in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit the like button, hit subscribe. See you later.